The race to find a safe and effective coronavirus vaccine has progressed at an unprecedented pace. Distribution of the vaccines to the public requires a massive coordinated effort. But before you start cleaning out your mask drawer, there are some things you should know. Manufacturing of the most promising vaccines is already underway, part of Operation Warp Speed, the government's initiative to accelerate vaccine production, which means doses are ready for distribution once the vaccine is approved for emergency use. But even with the head start, there won't be enough doses for everyone right away. Pfizer and Moderna estimate they can produce a combined 40 million doses for the U.S. by the end of the year, enough to vaccinate 20 million people since 2 doses per person are needed. Approximately 2 billion more doses will be produced by those two companies over the course of 2021. That sounds like a lot, but with a global population of more than 7 billion, most of us will have to be patient, especially as other manufacturers finish additional trials. A special advisory committee to the CDC has worked for months to create fair guidelines for who should get the vaccine first. The committee recommends distribution, prioritizing those in immediate high-risk groups. In Phase 1A, frontline healthcare workers and residents of long-term care facilities receive the vaccine. The idea is doctors, nurses, home health aides should be able to treat COVID-19 patients without jeopardizing their own health. It also protects residents of nursing homes and assisted living facilities, which account for a high percentage of severe COVID-19 illnesses and hospitalizations. Phase 1B of vaccination distribution will include other essential workers, police officers, transit workers, teachers, and grocery store clerks, whose jobs may put them at greater risk of contracting the virus. In Phase 1C, adults with serious medical conditions and seniors 65 and older can access the vaccine. Once those in high-risk groups have had the opportunity to be vaccinated, the general public will be able to get the shots. But certain people may need to wait even longer before they're eligible. For instance, with little research into how a vaccine might impact children, it may take some time before one is approved for them.
This election, a handful of swing states may mean the difference between winning or losing. But here's a big quandary. What happens if the votes are tallied and neither side is willing to admit defeat?
I don't want to say that the likelihood of reaching January 20th and the election still disputed is very high at all. And you'd hope the probability of that would be infinitesimal, and in most years it is.
What makes this year different? Well, for starters, the pandemic has radically changed the voting process. Instead of going to the polls, many more Americans chose to mail their ballots. Research shows mail-in ballots are rejected at a higher rate than traditional ballots, and they're more vulnerable to accusations of voter fraud. Now, fraud itself is found to be infinitesimal, but challenges to mailed ballots can gum up quick resolutions to elections. Challenged or not, mailed ballots also take longer to count. Depending on state laws, results may not be available until weeks after the election, an opportunity for confusion. Confusion, especially within the Electoral College. Electors are appointed officials, Democrats and Republicans, who translate a state's popular vote into electoral votes, ultimately deciding who is president. Experts say delayed results and accusations of fraud could prompt some states' electors to submit conflicting results to Congress, which certifies the results.
The Trump electors and the Biden electors to meet on December 14th, each claiming a source of authority. And we can imagine scenarios that you'd have these two conflicting submissions from the same state.
If that all sounds a little far-fetched, consider this. It's happened before, back in 1876.
Hayes was the Republican candidate, Tilden was the Democrat. And on the same day, the Hayes electors met and voted for Hayes in Florida, and the Tilden electors met and voted for Tilden in Florida. Both can't be right.
That created a conundrum, and the Constitution provided no clear solution. To resolve the dispute, Congress appointed a bipartisan committee tasked with deciding which set of results to accept. After months of arguing, a deal was struck just 2 days before the inauguration. Tilden and the Democrats would concede to Hayes and the Republicans. In exchange for the removal of federal troops from the South. The deal, known as the Compromise of 1877, is often cited as a turning point that allowed Jim Crow laws to take root in the South. A decade later, Congress passed the Electoral Count Act. It was meant to explain exactly how to decide which set of results to accept in the event that a state claimed more than one winner. But the legislation is murky at best.
The political scientists of the era, when it was produced, called it almost unintelligible. I think that almost is charitable.
But what is clear, according to the Constitution, is that the current presidential term ends at noon on January 20th. If Congress hasn't selected a winner by then, the Speaker of the House would be sworn in as acting president until the dispute is resolved.
Ever spend what seems like hours in a waiting room for what ends up being a medical visit lasting just minutes? Then you get the medical bill weeks later for way more than expected. That bloated bill may be due to an illegal practice called upcoding. Upcoding is when your healthcare provider overcharges for healthcare services you receive.
It's not fraud in the sense that they bill you for services that never happened at all. It's that they bill you more for services than they should have.
Let's say you go to your provider to treat a sore throat. The doctor comes in, tests you for strep, and prescribes antibiotics, but they charge you for an hour-long complex visit. Upcoding can also be hard to catch. For one thing, the bill you get in the mail may not list all your charges.
If your bill is more of a summary bill, you can reach out to them and request a detailed bill with kind of line-by-line level services. You can also get a copy of the bill from your insurer. It would be called an explanation of benefits, or EOB.
Even with a detailed invoice, medical bills can still be confusing. When you go to the grocery store, your receipt clearly lists each item you paid for, but with medical bills, they use a system of medical codes that can be hard to decipher. Good news is, a simple online search can help you decode your services.
And that can really help you when you're trying to figure out if it looks like the code was more or less appropriate for the visit.
Experts suggest it's good practice to take a closer look at your bill.
It is not unreasonable to be concerned that you might have experienced upcoding, and there are estimates for fraud in the healthcare system that suggest that it is extremely common.
But keep in mind, not every large bill is a sign of upcoding.
There's more to the code than just the number of minutes.
Even if you only saw the doctor for 5 minutes, if your symptoms were complex or difficult to diagnose, you may be billed at a higher rate. Still, if you're asked to pay a surprisingly high bill for that time you had the sniffles, the first step is not to pay the bill and notify your provider that you intend to dispute the charges. Look up the codes to see if they match the services you received. If they don't, ask your provider to explain the additional charges or to remove them from the bill.
Often just starting the conversation, you can make some progress on getting the bill down a little bit.